Great. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone, wherever you might be joining us from. My name is Wes Yee. I'm the Senior Director of Growth here at Guru. Really excited to introduce Rob Falcone, Director of Sales Engineering at Guru. We're both pictured there. I don't know if we should do a little pose here. I can turn this way. You can turn the other way. We can figure it out. Yeah, so today's webinar is Just Effing Demo. And we've got Rob here. He's going to tell us about the book, Just Effing Demo, and then he's going to share some tips and advice and guidance around how teams can make their reps more successful in demoing. So as we get into it, Rob, just wanted to ask you, first off, how did you get into this idea of writing a book about this?
Yeah, it was really going back years ago when I first got into sales and was really struggling doing the one thing that I was charged with doing, which was doing effective demos. I looked around and there was so little content out there specifically on this topic. And so I thought, once I figured it out, there had to be other people that were making the same mistakes that I was, and maybe this could help them avoid them.
All right, well, let's get right into it and take a look at the agenda.
All right. So what we're going to do, as Wes mentioned, we're going to go through some of the best practices and tactics that I found ultimately led me to lead effective demos after those months and months and months that I'll talk about where I struggled. We're going to get into some super tactical things that are specifically around the demos themselves, a couple things around what leaders can do to empower teams to lead effective demos, and then we'll spend last 20 minutes or so open Q&A for anything that you guys might have.
So definitely this is a webinar about trying to improve. So kind of wanted to do a quick poll on kind of the sense of the room. So I'm going to share a poll question. So if you're in the Zoom interface, you should now see a pop-up. And our poll question for the day is, in your opinion, what is the number one thing that defines a bad demo? We got 4 options here. Hopefully you can pick among these. Looks like the action is already fast and furious, but the options being the demo has no clear goal, the demo is irrelevant, the demo is overwhelming, and it feels like a lecture and not a conversation. So lots of votes coming in. Get those in there, and then we'll give you about 10 more seconds, and then we'll share the results. Wow, this is quite a balanced response to a poll. I don't know that I've ever seen one quite this close. All right, I'm going to share the results now. And so you can see that the victor is the demo has no clear goal, which I think we could all share the frustration of how that feels. But it's very close, within a couple of votes for all of these. Is this typically what you see, Rob, or what's kind of your sense as you've gone into and done talks on this topic?
Well, a spoiler alert is we're going to talk through all 4 of these, so it's nice that each is relatively relevant for almost the entire audience here.
Killer.
Very cool.
All right.
So a little bit of background on how this all came about for me. I had started a company back in 2010, and I was a product expert, like many of you on this call. I knew the product inside and out. I founded the company, and I would be doing demos for either potential clients or potential investors. And one after another, I would do these demos and people's eyes would roll to the back of their head and they'd be like, thanks, but no thanks. So I moved on to another company, spent a year in client success. Again, product expert, knew it inside and out from working with clients. Then I moved over to sales, and these were my first 3 quarters in sales, again, as a product expert. First quarter in sales, I participated in 1 major deal. Second quarter in sales, I was at 27% of my quota. Third quarter in sales, I was at 5% of my quota. 5. So just like when I was a co-founder, I knew the product inside and out, but I was shitty. And so I spent those 3 quarters just scouring the earth for ways to get better. I was like, there's no way I can be this bad at my job. And thank God they didn't fire me, because over the course of that 9 months, I did everything. I trial and errored. I read books the size of the Bible, like this one here. I watched good speakers. I recorded my demo and I tweaked things here and there, here and there. And ultimately at the end of that 9 months, I settled into a groove and I found a number of tactics that were relatively simple. It was not rocket science, but ultimately repeatable. And that's where I started to find success. And so after those 3 terrible quarters, here were my next 4: 101% of quota, 129% of quota, 170, 193. Now, these are sales specific numbers, but what I found was that whether or not you're a salesperson demoing to prospects, or a product manager demoing to potential end users, or a founder demoing to potential investors, there really are some very simple, easy to implement tactics that you can use that ultimately lead the audiences to understand and enjoy the demos that you're leading.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm a bit curious. So as you were going through those first 3 quarters and then beginning this process to sort of to improve and innovate the way that you demoed, was this something that others in the organization were also doing? Was this something that you sort of just, hey, I'm a competitive guy. I want to be winning. I don't like these. I don't like the 1 or the 27 or the 5 number. So I'm going to do something about this. Or did you have a manager that was mentoring you? Just curious kind of how that came about.
Yeah, fortunately, like I said, a lot of the folks on the call today probably would have fired me. And fortunately, I didn't have that. So a lot of this was self-motivated. There really wasn't a training program in place specifically for product demos. There really wasn't a whole lot of content out there. And so a lot was myself and trying to figure out, how could I possibly be this bad? And there has to be a better way to do something, because I think the product at the time probably is very similar to the products that a lot of you folks on the call. It was a very intuitive product, a very business user friendly product. It looked awesome. Why don't people get it when I demo it? And there was such a disconnect there that I felt that there had to be something I was doing wrong and that I could fix.
Yeah, great. Just quick note to share, seeing a couple questions come in. We are recording this and we will be sharing it. All right, back to Rob.
So again, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few tactics that you guys should be able to implement right away that are going to lead you to more successful demos, as well as 2 tactics specifically for leaders that you guys can implement within your teams to really empower them to do so. So when we're talking about a good demo experience, we did the poll on what makes a bad demo. Here's what buyers say make a positive demo. This is some research that HubSpot put out. And these are the number 1 and number 2 things that buyers that were polled said makes a great experience. The person demoing listens to their needs and they provide relevant info. So these 2 aren't necessarily surprising, but when you think about it, they're incredibly difficult because they're divergent. Listening to my needs and providing relevant info. It's really hard, right? Because think about how many demos you guys have probably got on, and you sit down, you're all ready to go, and the person on the other side goes, all right, show me what you got. Just the effing demo. This is why you can't just take a product expert like I was and like many of you are and expect them to lead demos that win business without really diving into tactics that allow you to do both of these things that your buyers and your audiences are telling you that they want. So let's go through these 6 tips. The first one, and it's the easiest one that we think intuitively to do, but the thing that I found I was often forgetting or screwing up was setting a good agenda. When you're preparing for and you're ultimately delivering this demo, it's really important to think about what is it that you're going to show so that your audience, understands what they need to understand so that you achieve the outcome that you want. This is how you can start your demo off right away and make sure that it's super relevant throughout. And so here's a quick example. Let's say that I was hopping on a demo with Wes, and I say, Wes, thanks for having me today. In this demo, I'm going to cover just the high-level functionality because you told me that you're just at the beginning of your evaluation process. If you like what you see today, we'll talk about some deeper dive demos that we can set up where you can get all of the product features that you're going to need. And we'll make sure that if there's anything else that you want to make sure we cover today, we hit on that. So before we dive in, is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover? So if you go through it, the first thing I did was I set the expectation that this is just going to be a high-level demo because 2, Wes told me that they're just at the beginning of the evaluation process. 3, the next steps that I want are a deeper dive meeting where I can go into the full functionality and uncover more and more and more about Wes. And the fourth, asking if there was anything in particular that Wes wanted to make sure we cover. That really does two things. One is it allows me to maintain control. If there is something pressing that Wes it's top of mind for him, he calls it out here and I know that I have to account for it in the demo, as opposed to him jumping in and throwing me off track at some point during the demo. And the second thing is it really does reinforce that this is going to be a relevant demo for Wes. I even care enough about making it relevant to ask him if there's anything in particular that I absolutely have to cover.
And that, on the receiving side, my impression, this really builds a lot of trust. And that's, if you're going to be selling anything, there's an element of trust required that, if I'm going to be putting myself on the line, not just my company's money, but my own, my own abilities within the company, the way that people perceive me, I need to trust that you're going to deliver on what you're telling me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found is that when I was doing this wrong, what it looked like was it was either super rigid. My agenda was like copy and pasted from the demo I did right before this, and it wasn't specific to someone like yourself. Or I would just jump in, we would build rapport talking about baseball, and I would just launch right into the meeting and totally forget this like really critical step. So it's a relatively easy one to execute when you're thinking about it and being intentional, but it's also really easy to miss.
Sure. All right, why are we looking at Judge Judy?
I promised gratuitous GIF usage. So as we said, good demos need to be relevant. Prospects want you to listen to their needs, but they also want you to get right in there and show the goods. And so it is this really hard balancing act between listening and showing, interrogating and overwhelming people with features, right? And so what I found is that to strike this balance, you really want to be asking the right questions in as little as just 5 minutes before you get into the demo. This is how you're going to get just enough information to be relevant, but without it feeling like an interrogation for the prospect. And so in the 5-minute discovery, there's really 3 things that you want to uncover from your prospect: present, future, and preference. Present is usually what challenges they're facing today. Future is what, if they wave the magic wand, they wish that they were able to do. And preference is, do they have any specific feature requirements on how they get there, personnel requirements on how they get there? If you can pull these 3 things out in 5 minutes, immediately what you launch into with your demo is going to be a little bit more relevant. So let's walk through an example here. Let's say again that I'm talking to Wes and we're getting ready to go into a demo. I might say, Wes, thanks for having me. Let's take 5 minutes to uncover a couple things that are going to allow me to demo to your specific use case. And so first, present. Tell me about the information that your sales reps use when they're selling today. Future. You mentioned you're hiring a bunch of new sales reps. And so what do you feel like those reps are going to need to be successful when they're out selling? Preference. Who's charged with setting those sales reps up for success today? Who do you want to be involved if you were to go and make the changes that you're thinking of? So 5 minutes, short conversation, but again, getting those 3 things are going to get you way more information that's going to help your demo be more relevant right out of the gate.
So I know in different environments, discovery takes place. It can be like a milestone within the process. It can be something that feels more ongoing. Where does that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, a lot of people, I'll see things like people say, I never do a demo without first doing discovery. And it really goes back to that divergent buyer wants. I think they want me to listen to their needs, so I'm never going to show them anything before discovery. And so we'll talk about the strategic component of this and the tactical component throughout the rest of the conversation here today. But from a strategic perspective, you really should be learning more about the prospect throughout the entire sales process. So you can think of discovery really as ongoing. And then from a tactical perspective, if you can get this information that you see here in 5 minutes, you go into the demo already prepared to be a little bit more relevant. And then we'll talk about some of the questions that you can ask throughout the demo itself to make sure that you're continually getting more and more information, even within the demo itself.
Do you find, has it been your experience, that people give different or the same answers depending on the format of the discovery? So if you're asking questions through a prep email versus when you're on a call with them live, is there a difference?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the things where a great product can be such a huge asset to uncovering more information, listening to their needs, and then providing relevant info. Because if I haven't built rapport with you, if I haven't shown that I know this product, that I know this industry, that I can help you potentially achieve an objective, what's in it for you to tell me more? There's not much. However, when we continue down the path and little by little, I'm showing you these features, I'm asking you questions, I'm telling stories about how others I've worked with. Now you feel like you can share more because there's context. You know why I'm asking. It's because I'm trying to help you through this demo understand how you'd use the product to achieve an objective. So it's absolutely different. Asking the same exact question word for word in an email to someone you've never met versus halfway through a demo, I found it can be very different for sure.
I love it. It's kind of like dating early on. There's the right time and a right place for different steps of the relationship, and you have to be really, really cautious and intelligent about that. It also reminded me of something that we say here on the marketing side at Guru, which is we've got to earn the right to market to you by providing value for you up front. And it sounds like this is kind of the same way that you approach doing demos.
Exactly.
All right.
So to that point, now you've done the 5-minute discovery. Now it's time to start showing the goods. And so this is where people that know the product inside and out sometimes run the risk of being overwhelming because they know the product inside and out and because they know every bell and whistle that the product has. So I found the really simple way to overcome this is by using these imaginary buckets. What you want to do is think about all of the products, all of the features that your product has, and all of the different things that it can do. And then take that full exhausting list. I mean, we have hundreds of them at Guru, and parse them down into just the few that you think are most relevant to this prospect based on what you know. Could be through research or even through your 5-minute discovery. So you put those individual features into these buckets, and then you arrange the buckets from macro to micro. Macro being the biggest and most high impact, micro being the most granular and the most nuanced. And then as you go from feature bucket to feature bucket, you're going to tell your audience what's in the bucket, what are they about to see, show them, you're going to push the buttons to show them the feature that you put in the bucket, and then you're going to explain why. Explain why you put this specific feature in there for this specific person. So what we're going to do is I'll show a very quick and dirty example using videos as my demo, but I'm going to show you 2 features ordered from macro to micro. And as I do, I want you guys to listen for the tell, show, tell, and how explicit and deliberate it is as I go from feature bucket to feature bucket. All right, so again, we're going to say that I'm demoing to Wes, and Wes is a head of sales. Okay, so Wes, you mentioned that you're hiring a whole bunch of new sales reps. And so I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can give reps the information that they need to get ramped up and get producing more quickly. So first, let me show you how you can automate information flowing to the new reps to remind them about how to do a process, like in this case, prospecting. So you can remind them exactly what they need to do when they're on LinkedIn prospecting to the CTO of Slack. They click this button right up here, and what you'll see is that the information on what to do when they're prospecting the CTO persona pops up right in front of them, telling them exactly things to do to look for, discovery questions to ask, etc. So I thought this would be important for you guys because new reps typically don't know what to do, and they probably don't even know what to search for to figure out what to do. So this automation is key because it's going to allow you as the leader to get the information that they need to them without them even needing to account for looking for it.
Now, we don't have a poll ready for this one, but I would be curious, or at least ask the audience to sort of think to yourself, do you have do your reps have this sort of playbook ready to go when they are when they're going to approach prospects?
Yeah, it's important. And so that was the, let's call that the macro feature. Now I go to my next bucket, the micro feature. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper and talk about how those new reps can get the information that they need when they're interacting with prospects live on a call. So I went through those prospecting steps and I locked in that meeting with the CTO of Slack. We know that new reps at this point, they know the product, but where they struggle is with objections about the product. So Wes, you can make it super easy for them to get exactly what they need to overcome an objection while they're on that call with the CTO of Slack. And so here they're on the call, they've got Salesforce open, they're talking to the CTO, and the CTO raises an objection about a specific product feature that we sell. Let's say it's the backup wizard. The rep can type in objection, they can type in backup, here's what pops up, boom, here are the talking points to overcome this objection about this specific product. And so the real win here is that you can create a safety net for your new reps. You can make them feel comfortable when they're on the call. Getting them more comfortable sooner is what's ultimately going to get them on the phone sooner, which means they're going to be productive and producing revenue for you sooner.
I love how you keep tying back to what the prospect said about their key initiative being hiring new reps. You talked about how the feature would help with that specifically. One of the things I've seen you do at Guru is to then use the demo to learn more about that and do a little bit more discovery. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so that's a good segue. If you think back to what I was talking about earlier about discovery being ongoing, the tactical side of this is what we'll talk about next and how you can layer in more discovery into the demo as you go through it.
Feels kind of like a dance, like a back and forth, like I'm going to give you a little bit, try to understand a little bit more so that I can continue to give you a little bit more.
Yeah, and what's great is that it's really a, sales has a negative connotation in a lot of senses. And this is one where this is really their tactics designed to make the conversation more beneficial to the prospect. It's not like you're artificially holding back information to maintain power or to manipulate. It really is so that you can continue to only show what the person needs and hold back all the other things that might not be relevant to their business. And so you're absolutely right. A dance is a good way to think about it.
And so you kind of said that, sales in some cases has a bad connotation, but yeah, I've been in environments where, we've called ourselves consultants or we've had our sales team come up with, they're really looking to be guides or, there are some other words that I think that speak actually more closely to the functions that you're talking about here, really trying to serve somebody's true needs.
Absolutely. So this is where the rubber meets the road to that point. The idea of the 5-minute discovery was you get just enough information for the rest of the demo to be increasingly more relevant. And so what you're going to do is with the questions that you ask and the way that you ask them, it's going to become a conversation almost organically. So this is some proof of this from Gong. They do a lot of great studies, but here was one in particular that I loved, and it showed that top performing sales reps receive 28% more questions during demos than average performers. When they follow that bucket approach, when they intentionally pare all of those features down into just the most relevant and keep those buckets concise, they're getting more questions than their average performing peers. And then on the flip side, not only do they receive more questions, but the top performers are asking more questions throughout the course of the meeting. And so what you see here is that the average performers, they get that interrogative spike at the very beginning of the meeting, and then it drops down and they're not asking many questions at all throughout the rest of the demo, whereas the top performers are pretty consistent throughout. So this is a back and forth conversation. Questions received, question asked. It truly does go back and forth. Average performers interrogate. Average performers get a question and respond with a generic answer. Top performers use questions throughout the demo, either before or after each of those buckets, to keep uncovering more info to become more and more relevant. And so I like to think about 3 types of questions that I can have in order to do this. Open-ended questions to get people talking, response questions to get more information, and point questions for effect. So we can go through quick examples of each of these. If I'm talking to Wes, open-ended question for effect. Wes, you mentioned that this specific feature that you talked about was important. Tell me a little bit about how you would impact the organization using it, or tell me a little bit about how you envision your team using this.
So a bit of a visioning exercise for me.
Exactly. And then the response question. Let's say that Wes pipes up, okay, so is this feature specifically for business users? Is this how your customers do this? I might say, yeah, there's a number of different ways that customers I work with use this, a number of different personas that use this feature. Tell me a little bit more about who you envision being involved with this process at your company. And the last is a point question for effect. Wes might say, I might say to Wes, you mentioned that this feature was a requirement for you. Now that you've seen it, are you confident that you can use it to accomplish X, Y, and Z? So point question, yes or no. Is or isn't he comfortable with this? And maybe what do I need to get him comfortable?
And then you're getting validation right there to close the loop. It's interesting as you talk through the last 3-4 slides. One of the things that it really sort of crystallized for me is that it's not always, it's not just the right answer that matters. It's also the right answer combined with the fact that I feel trust that you understand exactly why I'm asking you the question. It's almost like you could be walking down the street and ask a passerby, hey, how should I get better at my job? How should I invest my money? Some important question. They might be able to give you the exact right answer, but you're much less likely to take that and act on that than you would be if it were a trusted relative or a friend or colleague.
Exactly. And this is really hard for those of us in sales. Most folks in sales are gregarious folks that like to talk. If someone asks a question, they're going to answer it. Now combine that with sales folks that know the product inside and out, the instinct is always just to get the question, ask a question, or to just launch right into the feature. And so, I think that of these three, response questions are the most difficult for that reason. So one of the tips that I would give is when someone asks a question, just pause, stop. That'll give you the extra second to figure out, what play do I run in this case? Do I know this person well enough to just answer them with the direct, here is the answer? Or do I need to learn a little bit more about them and figure out there's shades of gray, and if I know a little bit more about them, I can laser in on which shade is exactly perfect for them.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's switch gears. We talked through 4 tactics that really were designed for doing good demos. Those were the more tactical side, and whether it be individual contributors delivering the demos or leaders inspecting the demos that your teams are doing, those 4 should be helpful. Then the last 2 here, let's talk about how leaders in particular can empower their teams to deliver those good demos. So this is another bit of HubSpot research here. They did a study on what buyers want to talk about on a first conversation and what sellers want to talk about on a first conversation. So the buyers are in green, the sellers are in navy blue. Again, relatively unsurprising when you see it laid out there like this. Buyers want to talk about the price, and they want to talk about how the product works. Sellers, on the other hand, they really want to understand buyers' goals, and they don't really want to talk about price and how the product works, right? And so what ends up happening, and I was extremely victim to this, was you get into this very binary yes or no for every stage of the process, every meeting throughout the process. So I always thought of how the demo aligned in the sales process like this. No opportunity, we're just doing an intro call. In the discovery stage, we're doing a full discovery call. Proposed solution, that's when I come in and I do the demo. Contract negotiation, boom, no more demos, it's time to negotiate, and then hooray, close one. Unsurprisingly, it didn't really work that well, thinking about things so black and white, so binary. And so instead, when I moved on to another company later, I started to think about, how do we break the sales process down into what does the prospect need to do to move through that buying process for them? What do my folks need to do to help the prospect move through their buying process? And then where do the demos fit in? And so when you think about it this way, maybe before there's even an opportunity, the demo is an intro demo with the goal of getting the folks excited enough to bring in some of their colleagues. And then in discovery, there's an intro demo with the goal of getting that wider audience to share more information that we can use to sell against as we move throughout the funnel. Then maybe when you get into proposed solution, you're doing an end user deep dive where the goal is for them to push the buttons and feel like they can truly implement your solution at their company. Maybe it's an executive demo where you might not show any functionality at all beyond a couple of clicks, just so that they feel like their team is comfortable with it and they can understand the ROI and the impact it's going to have to their strategic outcomes. So really, I got away from binary yes, no, do demo, don't demo, and instead got to a point where what is the appropriate demo for this appropriate audience for this stage? You, they, you. What do you need to cover so that they learn what they need, so that you get the next step that you want and you've seen be successful for other folks like them?
So the real key here then is to architect a sales process that's going to have different demos for different people to achieve different purposes.
Exactly. And it's funny because when we think about being more relevant within the demo itself, you're now seeing that expand out to the sales process and being more relevant to the audience for where they are in the process. So this whole approach really does work well in the nitty-gritty weeds of a demo, all the way out to demos throughout the process. It's all about understanding what your prospect or your audience cares about and helping them understand how your product can help.
And to the point of, so the ongoing discovery theme that we've been talking about as we go through this, I would imagine that as you're talking to different people with different personas, you have to actually look beyond their job titles, because what a job title means at company A could be totally different at company B. This person could be super technical, and the next person you talk to in that role maybe has no technical ability. So a lot of, again, the ongoing discovery, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's great for us because if it were just as easy as looking at a job title, we'd probably all be replaced by robots and AI. All right. So what better time to talk about Draymond Green? So we talked about how when I was struggling, I was using all of these backward-looking metrics to just remind myself that I was crappy. And those were things like number of deals closed, percentage of quota. And I struggled for almost a year trying to figure out why I was doing poorly. And so Draymond Green is a similar example. If you take a look at his backward-looking stats, namely field goal percentage and points per game, there's something there, but it doesn't really help you understand why. In 2012, he made 32% of his field goals and he scored 2.9 points a game. In 2013, 40% and 6.2. By 2014, 44% and 11.7. But if you were sitting there in 2012 or 2013, how would you really know how to improve? And so this is where you can break down performance into some of the more leading indicators. And that you do this in basketball and you can do this in demos. If you take a look at his shot chart here, what you can see that he was missing a lot of those shots that are further away from the basket, but still only worth 2 points. And so in 2013, let's take those shots and either move them back where they're just about the same difficulty, but they're worth 3 points, or move them forward where they're still only worth 2 points, but are a whole lot easier to make. And then in 2014, let's consolidate. You don't really hit 3-point shots from the corners, so let's move them up to the top of the key and only take 3-point shots at the top of the key and only take 2-point shots when they're right underneath the basket. And so you can take the same approach with demos. And the theme here is track and coach your folks to why. Why are they performing how they're performing? And so I use scorecards to do this. It's not super scientific. It's a bunch of crafty looking Excel sheets, but I take all of the different things that for this organization I think are critical to a good demo, put them on a scorecard, and between qualitative notes that help you convey why you thought they did something well or why you thought they did something poorly, to the quantitative numbers of 1, 2, or 3, you now can really start to paint a picture of, even before your rep closes a deal, whether or not they are improving and what they need to do so. And so this is an example of one of the folks on our team who joined us earlier this year. And you can see that there's two things that are interesting. One is the specific components of the demo that she needed to improve on. And two is how she trended over time. And so the specific features, we knew that if there's only 24 hours in a day, we're going to spend those hours working on the specific feature demonstrations and strategic alignment, and then watching that trend over time. Same thing is that when you move out from an individual, now look at the whole entire team. Maybe the entire team is struggling with one specific skill set, and that leads you to believe that you need to run a training session at your next sales kickoff on that specific skill. So this idea of tracking coaching to why is really how you can get ahead of the backward-looking metrics and really avoid the 9 months of where I sat there scratching my head of why I was struggling.
What I love about this is that it's so objective. It really, when you share this sort of feedback and you can, and people can actually score themselves even, or work with colleagues on it. It makes it really clear to see where the patterns are, whether it's for, in this case, Molly, or like you said, for the entire team. And it lets both the individual contributor who's, hopefully wanting to improve themselves and be the best version of themselves, but also their manager and the people that they work with to be able to quantitatively identify where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, where do we need to place an emphasis.
Exactly.
All right, great. Well, that was quite a sprint through. So let's just quickly summarize the 6 points. So set a clear demo agenda. This is the beginning of building trust, it sounds like. Number 2, the 5-minute discovery. You talked about how asking those questions is a great way to get the conversation off to a good start. Grab a bucket, categorizing those pieces that you mentioned into different areas by priority and by relevance to the prospect. Making it a conversation, that back and forth, that dance that we talked about. Demo to the buying process, making sure that you have the right purpose aligned with the right demo that you're giving. And then tracking and coaching to why, what we just talked about there with some of the analysis, really digging past that initial layer of being results oriented and really trying to answer that question why. All right. Well, next we've got a little bit of time for a Q&A. Something special for this one in case those of you who, and as I mentioned, everyone will get the recording, but anyone who wants to go a little bit deeper, this is your chance. Anyone who asks a question that we answer on this webinar will actually get a copy of Rob's book, Just Effing Demo, and we'll mail that out to you. So go ahead and send those in. We have a couple already, and I'll just throw them at you, Rob. So one quick one was we shared some numbers and stats, and I think people are probably going to take some of these slides back to their teams and use those to tell some of the same story that you just shared with us. Were those B2B stats? I think that was a question specific to the HubSpot numbers that you're showing.
That is a good question. I don't know, but I can go ahead and find out. General comment, feel free. I love connecting with folks on LinkedIn. So Leanne, I can track that down for you, share the case study with you directly, and we'll figure that out. It's a good question.
I would say my guess is yes, HubSpot is most typically a B2B tool. So their audience tends to be that way. So now a question comes in, how long should the first demo be? And so I'm interested in this one because the person sort of seeded or followed up to their question with 5, 10, 50 minutes. And I'm curious from you, Rob, is it something where it's actually the amount of time or there are certain milestones and it's, one of those. I had an old English teacher who used to say, people would say, how long does our essay need to be? And she would say, again, she was kind of old school. She would say, as long as a girl's skirt is long enough to cover everything, short enough to keep it interesting. So kind of how do you think about how to strategize around the length of the demo?
Yeah, it really does require the context. So I would suggest, what's happening before and after that first demo? Is there any sort of interaction between the rep and the prospect prior to the first demo? If there's not, cool. Maybe the first demo is a 30-minute meeting with 5 minutes of discovery, 10 minutes of demo, and 15 minutes talking about the longer-term buying process if you're in a more complex sales cycle. If it's first contact, relatively transactional product, maybe that first demo is an hour and you go through all of the features and the goal is to get the person to click yes, put a credit card in and get started and see the rest for themselves. So I'd say the answer to the how long should the first demo be really, it's really that depends on the context of the cycle itself and what the interaction has been. I would say, again, the guidance would be stay away from absolutes. Think about first demo for this person, how is that different from first demo for that person, different from company A versus company B?
So probably some testing involved also. I know you mentioned you tried a bunch of different things. I would guess that that's probably a good starting point, is sort of test it out, have your reps, try giving the super condensed version, see how that goes, and just make sure that you're keeping track and measuring that success as you go. Another question kind of about, and I love this because, in the same way that I think about how I, work with the people on my team, a lot of it is building habits. And so this person asks, how many demos or hours per week of demos do you expect sales managers and sales reps to spend listening to others' demos that have been recorded?
Yeah, I guess that could be the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. I would say focus less on the number of hours and focus more on what they're listening to. So for example, when I first built out an SE team, we didn't have anything at the time like Chorus or like Gong. And so I was kind of having them do exactly what you suggested, spend X amount of hours each week listening to other people demo. Now with tools like that, the person doesn't need to be on the call. Like we would sit in the corner of the room listening and taking notes. And it was, again, if you listen to enough demos, eventually you're going to get it. Now with Chorus, what I'll have, Molly, for example, who I mentioned earlier, what she did was I would have her listen to a certain number, let's say it's like 3 Chorus calls. But what was more important than the number of calls she was listening to was I had her use that scorecard. And I said, now that you've been trained on the methodology, go through and scorecard these demos yourself. And now they're going from being a passive listener to an active listener. So I would say less important than the number of calls or the number of hours you have them shadowing. More important is you're giving them a framework that they can be an active listener. What is it specifically that you want them taking away from demos? Because you know it's going to help them do whatever it is that they're doing better. One more point to that is if you think about that scorecard, you might have person A say, go listen to demos and focus specifically on this skill set because your scorecards dictate that that's the skill set you need to improve on. Person B, it's a totally different skill set. So again, less about the number and the amount and more about how do you make them an active listener.
Got it. And so we did get a question about the scorecards. So one of the metrics on there was about how many questions they're asking. And this person asked, how do you grade? How do you make sure that the questions are the relevant questions versus, 5 meaningless questions just to get that box checked? My guess is that there are certain questions that you would define as, things that are in the bucket and things that aren't. And so it would probably be the ones that are, but I'd be curious to hear how you think about this.
Yeah, so that's what's great is when you think about the rubric for your scorecard, try to avoid absolutes like you asked X amount of questions for the exact purpose that you raised. 20 bad questions is nothing compared to 2 really, really thoughtful ones. And so the metric here is actually to score a 3 on questions asked. 75% of the questions that you asked were open-ended, really thoughtful, good questions versus any questions? How does this look to you? So you could think about it in terms of percentage of questions asked. Were they effective? And you can tweak this for your own use case, but the goal is exactly what you said. 4 really good questions, 75% of which were open-ended, thoughtful, as opposed to 20 nonsense, yes or no. That's where you'll want to craft this up. It's less about the number again, but more about the quality.
All right. Cool. Next question in is, what do you do when you're losing someone? So you're halfway through, not getting great engagement from the questions, maybe a lot of one-word answers, even for the open-ended questions. What are some of the tactics that you use to pivot when you can sense that things aren't going so well?
Hopefully this isn't a test and I'm losing you and you're trying to see what I can do to re-engage it. Usually I curse, but I've been told that that's probably not good for a business setting, so I won't curse. No, what's interesting is, again, every prospect is different, every audience is different. And I was actually just talking with one of our reps about this yesterday, where a certain slide in his deck was meant to be a conversation piece, but he had already seen that the person on the other side was very one-word answer, very close. And so instead, he presented the slide, it was his point of view, and instead of having the conversation there, he just moved those questions to the demo itself, the demo being when he was showing the product. And so if you think about that tell, show, tell, it could be question, tell, show, tell, or tell, show, tell, question. So what I recommend if I feel like I'm losing someone is either ask more questions if they seem like the type of person that's talkative and just like checked out playing with their phone, or if they seem like the type of person that's quiet, I'll just hold my questions until I have another reason to ask them, like a certain feature, and then I'll go at them with a question that allows them to say like, okay, I see why he's asking me this question in the context of the product. I'll give him a little bit more information. So again, to summarize, it's like, am I losing them because they're a talkative person and just checked out? Or is this a closed person who just isn't very talkative and I need to engage them a different way?
So again, just being willing to improv, willing to be, a dance partner as opposed to an instructor where I take this step, you take this step. Oh, if you took that step, I need to take a different one. And being, having that next level of understanding about what you're trying to accomplish with this conversation, where you can make that next step the right step.
Exactly.
All right. Another question. So this is about when there's a panel of buyers with multiple needs all over the place. So you've got, people who are end users, people who are in the executive suite. We had talked about how different demos for different audiences. And so, perhaps one answer is just that split those up by use case so that you're serving their true purpose. But let's say that you tried, they said, hey, we've only got time within our organization to meet with you once, and we're going to bring the whole squad. How do you keep them engaged throughout the demo? Is it prioritization based on the highest paid person's in the room's needs? And then how do you also manage time and make sure that you're covering all the different stakeholders that are there?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I would do would be go right back to the you, they, you. What do you need to do so that they get what they want, so that you get what you want out of that meeting? And so if this is a large group of people where that second you, what do you want out of this meeting? It's the executive sponsor to say, yes, I'll sponsor this project. That's probably going to influence what you do and what you don't do. If it's get everyone to agree to a deeper demo, that's going to influence. So I would say the first kind of generic answer that I can give there is go back to what is the goal of the meeting first. From there, tactically, I try to write people's names down, and if I know enough about them, either from discovery, prior conversations, or even from LinkedIn, I'll make a point and let the person know that this is going to be interesting to them. So even if I know nothing else but what we talked about earlier, which was someone's role and some of the bullet points on their LinkedIn profile, when I talk about a feature, I'll mention, hey, Wes, I think this might be interesting for you. We can definitely talk about this a little bit deeper offline. So that's a simple way that if you truly have a group of different personas and you've identified like what is your goal coming out of this meeting, tactically, one way to make sure that everybody feels engaged in the meeting is to call them out and let them know why what you're showing could be interesting to them, and maybe set up a deeper conversation separately.
So really being intentional about being thoughtfully inclusive and making sure that whether they're, an extrovert and asking lots of different questions, or they're someone who's quiet on the sidelines, that you're engaging them at some point as you go through that demo to make sure that their needs are met.
Mm-hmm. And it's the easiest thing that you can do. I mean, people say about my book, like, this sucks, it's too short. And then other people are like, this is awesome, it's so short. If you take away some of these little tactics that you guys could go off from this webinar and ask your team, very next demo, what is the goal of the demo? Because again, if the goal of a demo is the CMO's in the room and we want them to agree to sign off, and you have someone else in the room that's asking 30 questions and driving into a rat hole about integrations and analytics, that will understand how you navigate that. And in that scenario, to achieve your goal, you might say, hey, seems like you have a lot of questions about integrations and analytics. Let's take that offline and we'll set up a specific meeting between you and I, or you and my head of architecture, to go through that specifically. And so it allows you to, again, not just totally ignore someone like that, but you're telling them you're going to answer all of their questions, just not within the context of this meeting. And most times people appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. So some rapid fire ones still coming in. So I saw that your success in closing deals improved when you implemented these techniques, made these sort of improvements in your process. What sort of differences, if any, did you see in the average length of your sales cycle?
It's interesting. Off the top of my head, I don't have the answer in terms of cycle time. Again, that's totally dependent on product, business model. What I will say is that some of this is counterintuitive, like not showing put it this way. You would expect that, okay, I have all these features. I'm going to show them all in one shot. That way I've shown them all and I don't need to have a second meeting. Like intuitively get all the features out, and that's going to shorten my sales cycle. And what I found was that it was the opposite, right?
Because you're missing, you're not factoring in timing, right?
Exactly. And people would just feel so overwhelmed. They'd be like, thanks, call me in a few months. And so it's almost counterintuitive to say, hey, parse it down to only the 3 most important features. And then say, the goal of this meeting is to get another meeting where we go deeper into the others. That's counterintuitive because you think, oh, you're adding more steps in the process. But if each step is relevant and each step is helpful and adding value to their process, maybe they're seeing new things that they should think about when they're talking to your competitors. Like all of those are good things. It's just counterintuitive to think that way. So I really believe in good process over optimize for good process, and the downstream metrics will follow, versus let's optimize for how do I shorten my sales cycle, because you might end up going down some wrong behaviors there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So we have still quite a few questions left, and we've just got 8 minutes. So we'll take as many as we can in the meantime. And then any that we don't, we'll make sure that we cover them in the recap blog post, and we'll send that out in addition to the recording so that everybody gets their answers to their questions that they've asked. So the next one is, if you have a non-engaged client, should you try to demo them to get them more engaged? I know that this is something that we talk about often within Guru. We solve a lot of different problems for people. Most people buy us just to solve the one initial thing that they were struggling with. And I know we try to do our best to add value to their organizations by saying, hey, you also have this feature that could solve this problem and help this team. And so, I would guess that your answer, I could probably guess where your answer would go here, but thoughts on engaging clients who maybe aren't the best users yet?
Short answer, yes. Slightly longer answer is why. Nobody likes getting the call like, hey, I'm here to sell you more stuff. But if you have a new feature that helps people just like them, definitely go for it.
Right. Thoughts on the use of explainer videos, both for prospecting and in an actual demo?
Love it. Definitely for prospecting. Yeah, 100%. If it's relevant, right? You saw today, I used a video in place of a demo, but I didn't push play and sit back and let this great baritone voice, usually British, explain it. I explained it. And so the execution of a video live, that's what you'll have to think about there. But in terms of being visual, I find that most folks are more visual today. So yeah, there is a very short, I used to do this all the time when I was prospecting. I would record a 15-second GIF and send it out. Like, here's something that I think might be helpful for you. So yeah, if you think that you have a very visual product and people seeing it would make them more likely to engage and dive deeper, go for it. The only caveat is don't show everything. Very, very short. Shorter is better.
Yeah. Next question. Do you find that the deal moves through the sales cycle faster by conducting discovery on the same call as the full demo? I guess, part of this, it seems like it's almost a rigged question where it's, yes, of course it moves faster, but the question is really, can you support a full demo instantly when you've just done the discovery, or is there a level of customization and thought that you need to put in that it's something that can't happen instantly?
Exactly. And so it goes back to the point. Would the deal move faster if they got a full from a perspective of showing lots of features, but it was generic? or would it move faster if they got one feature that was generic, setting up for a second meeting where all of the features were custom? That's what you would need to answer there. I think, and it's something we're working on here at Guru and at most places that I've been in, is there's this very, do we demo, don't we demo? Is it a bad thing to demo without doing a discovery call? I'd love to get us to a place where that first meeting, it could be 15 minutes of conversation, 15 minutes of demo, 15 minutes of next steps, or 5, 5, and 5. And so when you think about it in those modular buckets, it really can be modular. Boom, boom, boom.
This is kind of the art, right? Is figuring out what is the right experience for this person that I'm going to meet with, and this person that's evaluating this part of the product or has this specific problem.
Exactly.
Here's a quick one. 5-minute discovery call. Do you recommend writing down the buyer's questions or just making mental notes? Does writing in front of a buyer intimidate them? So I'm going to maybe cheat and just say, we record all of our calls. And there's no better way to be able to go back and make sure that you didn't miss anything than going to reference the recording. But yeah, just to this person's point, let's say you're in person and you're not a reporter, so you're not going to set down the tape recorder. What's your strategy?
I'm still an OG note taker, even though we use Chorus. And so the reason why is if you ask about a certain feature, I'll take a note and I'll write that down and say, got it. Okay. Well, I'm going to show you something specifically that can execute that. And by me writing it down, now I think about my buckets. Just by writing it down, I'm like, okay, do I slot that in between buckets 2 and 3? Do I replace bucket 4 and replace it with that? So I find that from a pure mechanics of the demo, writing it down helps. But you're right. For full on notes, that's where I think Chorus is an awesome tool.
Yeah. Cool. Here's a question. I struggle with pausing after they ask me a question. I like to get my point across quickly. Do you have any recommendations on how to do that without them thinking that I'm not listening to them?
Yeah, what I found is actually the opposite happens. When you do leave that pause, it shows that you're totally digesting what they said and delivering a considered response. So the tactic that I'll do on the phone oftentimes is I'll mute while someone's talking, and that forces me to then take a beat, then press on mute and respond. Because really what you're doing in that little window where you're leaving a pause is, again, thinking back of, have they asked me a question where there is a very direct answer? Have they asked me a question where I need to uncover a little bit more in order to provide a relevant response? Have they asked me a question where it's easier just to show it in the product and it'll take me a split second to actually pull it up? So by giving yourself that beat there, it's almost like you giving yourself a little extra breathing room to run the right play. And the bonus point is that people usually do take it as, this person isn't just spouting off their generic crap. They're actually listening to what I've asked and giving me something that is relevant.
Right. You actually, it's funny. It is a bit counterintuitive, but people don't want immediate, easy all the time. They want this person took that time again to think about me and make sure that I'm getting exactly what I need. And they're not just shooting the next thing. I think back to this example of, in the old days, you could, you go and buy like brownie mix, you got to add an egg, right? And you got to stir it up and put it in the oven. When they first released brownie mix, you didn't have to add the egg. They were able to get that into the powdered form that you could just mix it and put it in. But they found that sales were worse because people didn't feel like they had done enough to actually make that brownie. And so they wouldn't bring it to people and say, I made this for you, because they felt like, oh, all I did was add water and stir it up and throw it in the oven. They took the egg part out and said, you add an egg. Now you feel like you made this thing. Even you're not making it from scratch, but you had more agency in it. And it's that extra step. I feel like there's a little bit of that dynamic here at play where, hey, I invested in you by telling you about my needs. The pause that you're doing is telling me that you're taking that information, considering it, and really giving me the true answer and serving my true need. Okay, so we've got a number of questions here about scheduling the time for sales teams, which is probably a bigger question than we're going to be able to answer in 1 minute. So maybe that one's worth a follow up, or maybe that's probably a big enough topic to be its own webinar, honestly. So I'm gonna say we'll table that one, and we are at the top of the hour. So if anybody needs to jump, please feel free. As I mentioned, we will be sharing this recording, and we will follow up with answers to these questions either directly or in the recap blog post. But with that, I'll just shoot it over to you, Rob. Any final words for the day as people head back to their teams and hopefully, maybe some more effective demos.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you ever have any questions, feel free. It makes me really happy if I can help someone avoid the challenges that I saw. So by all means, feel free to reach out.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you, Rob, for the great presentation. As I mentioned, anyone who got a question in before this moment of me speaking is going to get an email from us. And if you're interested in Rob's book, we'll send you a copy. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Thanks again.